All right, everybody. So I just finished up with my interview with Grace Terrell here. And it was one of those ones that, when you find somebody else that does what you do, just like you do, and agrees like you do, it makes for a great conversation. So that's a little bit longer of an episode, but we talk about everything from parasite cleanses to gut health to hormones to, the services and things that she offers. And her website is gracefulwellness.net. She is able to help people in the group coaching, which is called the New Leaf, and it's her group program. She does one-on-one coaching as well. And again, working with getting the body to heal itself naturally. All right. So she's a holistic nutritionist. She's a health coach. She's a founder of the Graceful Wellness. And after she battled health and hormonal issues for a while, she became passionate about this particular topic. And so I think one of the big strong points that she has, and I feel like everyone who has a story, who has an experience, who has a negative thing happen to them, you have two options. You can allow it to kind of consume the body, or you can allow it to fuel you to your next purpose, to your next passion. So that is what Grace has been able to do. So definitely tune in, strap in, listen to this podcast. You may have to listen to it in two chunks. That's fine. But be sure to go and follow her on Instagram as well. Like, comment, share, all of the usual stuff here. But thank you again for tuning in. Enjoy this interview with Grace Terrell. All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Doc Jacque Show. I've got Grace Terrell over here. This is a profile that I stumbled upon on Instagram, and I was super curious. Love the content and everything that you're putting out there, and I was like, I want to get you on the podcast. So thank you for taking the time out today while you're in Tulum, enjoying Mexico. Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
Absolutely. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you get into what you're doing? What are your specialties? I'm going to kind of give you free roam to just tell us more about you.
Yeah. So I started doing this about 2.5 years ago. I was always very into wellness because, like we were talking about before, my dad's a chiropractor. So I kind of grew up around the whole holistic wellness scene, and I was a dancer. So I was always like very aware of different foods and how they impacted my body. Mm-hmm. And so I would try out different diets, and I ended up being vegan for around 6 years.
Okay.
And I found that just did not work well with me. So I developed a lot of hormone issues and gut health issues. And after that, I was trying to like recalibrate my body and figure out what diet was best for me. And then I decided to get certified, and here we are.
That's awesome. And it's such a slippery slope when you tell people I was vegan and now I'm not. How do you feel looking back on the vegan diet? How do you feel about that particular diet? One size fits all, not for everybody, or absolutely no go? What would you feel?
Yeah, it is a really tricky topic. And I wish it wasn't, because there's so many women and men, honestly, that have been vegan and it just didn't work for their body. But you get so stuck in the paradigm that it's like the best diet, whether you go into it for like the environment or for health reasons.
Yeah.
And so then it's kind of hard to unravel the idea that it's not good for everyone. So I think if you do it very strategically, you can be healthy, but I don't think it's the optimal diet for like 90% of people.
Yeah. And I would strongly agree with you on that as well. And it's easy because like I'll have patients, I still do have patients who are vegan, and a lot of them are coming on. Speaking of like gut health, I always ask, what made you go vegan? And so they'll be like, well, it's either the ethical reason, which, I'm not here to give one side or the other on it. That's fine. But then most of the time they'll be like, well, beef just doesn't agree with me. I can't eat beef. If I eat beef, my stomach hurts or whatever it is. And I'm like, aha. I'm like, so if we can fix that, you would want to go back to that diet. And they're like, well, yeah, like I miss having a steak or whatever it is. So I know that you have probably seen that too, again, with one of your specialties being in gut health. Have you seen a lot of people going vegan due to poor digestive health?
Actually, no. I've seen a lot of people go vegan because they think it's the healthier diet. And then if they try and go back to eating meat, that's when they get digestive issues. So they actually didn't have those issues to begin with, but after not eating it for a while, your stomach acid lowers, the the bacteria in your gut changes. And so then it's very hard for them to break down meat. And that's when they run into the digestive issues.
Absolutely. I love it. And I love that you said it that way too, because it's spot on. So, so with the gut health and talking about like the vegan diet and getting into more of like how you eat now, how would you describe how you eat now? If people are just curious, like, well, how do you eat then? What are you usually eating?
I eat a lot of meat,
Okay.
which has gradually happened over the past couple of years as I've transitioned out of a vegan vegetarian diet. I don't eat a lot of grains. I just find that doesn't agree with me. And honestly, my diet does change a lot. Like now that I'm in bloom and I've been traveling for a bit, like I don't eat the same as if I was home cooking for myself.
Yeah.
But the amazing thing is, I feel like once you build a really good foundation of like strong gut health, strong hormonal health, then you have a lot more flexibility with your diet because your inflammation bucket is lower. So when I was feeling my gut and my hormones, I was very strict, very rigid with my diet. And if I would eat something that was like out of the scope of what was healthy for me at the time, I would flare up and I would feel terrible for a couple of days.
Yeah.
But now, because I have a good foundation and I have like a lot of flexibility, I can eat gluten here and there. I have dairy in my diet. I have all these things that I used to think were the problem, but really was my body that was the problem.
Yeah. So I'm curious too, and I'm not trying to put you on a spot. I'm just curious. Food sensitivities, like when you see and you hear and you address food sensitivities, from what I have gathered from other people's experiences, there's other doctors, there's coaches and stuff that are out there that specifically treat just based off of the food sensitivities. When you hear somebody has food sensitivities, what is something that comes to your mind as to why those may have been created?
The first thing is they have a damaged gut lining.
Yeah.
Because that's really where the food sensitivities come from. And it's funny because when I was dealing with all my issues, my dad, who's a chiropractor, like we talked about, he would run these tests through his practice.
Yep.
I would always complain to him about my stomach problems. And he was like, I don't know if this is the end all be all. Like you probably have IBS or SIBO or something, but like just take these tests so you can see what foods are actually causing you the issues.
Yeah.
And so I took the test and everything that I was eating at the time showed up. And because at the time I didn't have the knowledge of what a food sensitivity is or like what the test was actually testing for, I was like, oh gosh, I have to cut out all these foods from my diet. And so I did. And because at the time I was vegan, I was left basically nothing.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what drove me into reintroducing meat because I literally had nothing left in my diet that I wasn't sensitive to.
Yeah.
But yeah, I later found out that when you do these tests, it's basically testing which, like what your body or what your immune system is reacting to. And so if you're eating spinach, nuts, tofu, eggs, those things are going to show up on your test because the proteins from those foods are passing through your epithelial layer, which is supposed to be closed.
Yeah.
But because your gut lining is damaged, it's open and they're passing into your blood and causing an immune reaction. So it's not actually the food that's the problem. It's your gut that's damaged. That's the problem.
Yeah. I think if like my team can just highlight just that like video clip, it's so simple, but so profound, like at the same time where like I've had people who have run, 10 plus food sensitivity panels and they're like, oh my gosh, I keep having food sensitivities and I keep having more and I keep having more. I'm like, well, what'd you do to fix it? They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, like, it's great. Cool. You found out that you have it, but what's causing it? And so I like to, when I talk about testing, to me, there's root cause testing. So what's the cause? And then there's symptom testing. And for food sensitivities, it's kind of a mixture of both. It's a cause because it can cause complaints, but it is a symptom of further dysfunction. So you have to peel back the layer, go another level deeper and figure out what caused the lining to open up. Is it gluten? Is it stress? What is it? Is it medications? What did you do to your gut that made it respond that way? And it frees up a lot of people. And I think that's really important information because I know food sensitivities, I think in the last like 5 years or so, it really took off. And then everyone was like, let's do them. And everyone was like, screw food sensitivity tests, are useless. And it's like, well, most of them had 40 plus foods that showed up and they're like, this is ridiculous. What am I supposed to eat? So yeah. So moving in that kind of same vein of things. So when we have GI dysfunction stuff, without my bias, what are you typically testing when it comes to like stool analysis? Like what are you usually going after and looking for on like a stool test?
I mean, it's good to see the balance of bacteria, like the good bacteria versus the bad bacteria. If you have too much opportunistic bacteria, which could be bad, could not be bad. Opportunistic is like, it's a little finicky. And
Yep.
I like these tests, but they're really only helpful, in my opinion, to see if you have like H. pylori or parasites or something that is like a definitive, okay, you have this bacteria that is known to cause X, Y, and Z. And there's a certain protocol that we can implement to like eradicate a specific bacteria or something like that. But I do think the problem with a lot of these tests is they're so general and we don't really know what bacteria does what for the most part. And this is where it goes into like probiotics too. It's like so many companies are jumping on. I don't know if you're laughing because you agree with me.
Probably. Keep going.
So many companies are jumping on these trends, but we've really only scratched the surface of the science with like what bacteria does what. And so while it can be helpful, a lot of the times it's kind of just a shot in the dark, and the protocol ends up being similar for most of what you're going to find, unless it's like H. pylori or something like that.
Yeah. So you see H. pylori a lot as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see it all the time.
Yeah.
It was used to, from my understanding from the research I've done, because I see it so often, it used to just be considered like a third world country, like disease. And now it's like, I think it's like 50% of Americans, I believe, have H. pylori. And to me, I know, and I know that you would know this too, like the percentage is way higher than 50% because it can go asymptomatic. So you can just be a carrier of H. pylori, and then you share a glass or a cup or a kiss with somebody else, and boom, you give yourself some H. pylori, and then you create a new carrier. So it's one of the most common ones that I see, one of the most resilient little buggers as well, but it causes like everything under the sun. And I mean, I hate H. pylori. I hate and love it because it's fun to get rid of, but it's a bummer when you have it.
I know. And it is funny because you can be asymptomatic. And that's the thing with so many of these things as well. It's like you can have a parasite and be asymptomatic. I think it just all comes down to the resilience of your body and how things are working, because your gut is an ecosystem. So there's going to be bad bacteria in there regardless, but it's like, if the good bacteria can balance it out and make sure everything is working properly, then you're fine. It's just when the bad overcomes the good, get issues.
Yeah. I love it. Yes. So when you're looking at the gut, we agree on a lot of the same kind of principles and things of that nature. When you're looking at the gut, I know one of your other specialties is the hormones. And for anybody who's been living under a rock, the hormone side of things, it drives me crazy still to this date when doctors will test your hormones, but they won't test your stool. To me, it doesn't make any sense at all. Especially like when you run certain tests and you'll have beta glucuronidase show up, it's a phase 3 estrogen detoxifier. If that's high, then you're going to be recirculating estrogen. So you can have another form of that dominance. But how have you seen in practice the correlation and causation between poor gut health and hormonal health?
They're so linked. Usually, I mean, almost always, if you have poor gut health, you're going to have poor hormone health. And it's tricky because people think they're so separate. So when they're researching things online, they're like, and they have, a symptom profile of like, if you're a woman, like bloating, painful periods, acne, fatigue, brain fog. And then when you put those into Google, so many different things come up. It's like, oh, I have estrogen dominance. Oh, actually, I have PCOS and high testosterone. Yeah. Oh, wait, no, maybe I have SIBO. And it's like, I mean, it doesn't really matter. Like you're just all kind of messed up. And I think it's really helpful when you look at the body as a whole, and it's a lot less overwhelming because you realize like the body can heal itself if you put like the basics into practice, and it doesn't have to be super confusing. And I think that's one of the things that actually stops people from healing is trying to micromanage every symptom as if it's a separate thing, because everything is connected. If you start eating better for better gut health, your body is going to start to utilize and, make the hormones rebalance themselves. But if you try and micromanage each thing separately, it's going to just cause things to go out of balance even more. So I think if you just get the basics down, it's a lot more useful than Googling your symptoms and freaking out about having like high estrogen, high cortisol, you know, because they're all connected.
Yeah. And that's the big thing too, is everything is ridiculously interconnected. And I remember going through, like, I went to undergraduate at Penn State, and I had a really good professor that was doing, I don't even think it was supposed to be part of it, but it was a philosophy class. And he was talking about the mind-body connection. He goes, there is no mind-body connection. There is one. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then going to chiropractic school, I'm like, well, wait a second. And then I'm like, no, it is, like, everything is one. So like if I step on a tack, every single area of my body is going to be impacted from something sharp going into my foot. So when you think of it that way, instead of playing whack-a-mole and whacking symptoms, trying to do it, and then you end up with like 50 different supplements that you're taking, find out the freaking cause, correct it, and then everything else kind of falls into play. So it's like, sometimes it's the less is more. It's like, just be patient, give it a little bit of time, get off the internet and stop Googling stuff. Cause you know, I'll have consults where people are like, hey, I started taking blah, blah, blah. What do you think of that? I'm like, what the hell are you taking it for? You're like, I fixed that. You're taking this, and no, stop. And the other thing too, have you run into, this might be more controversial, so you're welcome to not discuss it, but the MLM side of things, like a lot of my patients will get hijacked by MLM companies. And there is a tea. It's called Tape tea or Tape tea, TAPEE. Okay. It's like TCM origins. That's one of like my big passions, is traditional Chinese medicine. And so like you look at it, everything's written in like Chinese. You're like, oh, it's cool. And like, oh, and then you look it up and like, okay, there's goji berry and there's astragalus. There's like some herbs and stuff in there. I'm like, cool. And my patients are like, man, I'm taking this, and I've had arthritis for 10 plus years, and overnight it went away. And I'm like, well, all right. I mean, it seems like the herbs, I know all the herbs do. I have like 15 herbal books. Like, it all makes sense. And then the FDA dug into it, and I don't trust the FDA half the time, but they dug into it. It was like the end of August of this year, and it found out there's 2 corticosteroids that were in there. It was like dexamethasone, and there was another like one. And I'm like, what? And it snuck it under the radar. So there's like these products and stuff that are out there. And I understand too, Amazon, I guess, is creating like clone products for like supplement companies too. So be careful, you know, anyone's listening, be careful with where you're ordering your supplements from. And that's why it's good to go from somebody who's trusted, somebody that you're selling it, whether it's a whole, you know, wholesale distributor or a health coach or a doctor, or whatever you are, buy there. So that way, you know that the quality is what it's supposed to be, so you can trust it. But that was another thing that drives me crazy. But the MLMs, that
horrible.
That drives me insane.
The messages I get that are like, hey girl, love what you're doing online, would love to share, you know, this product line I have. I'm like, absolutely not. I already know you.
Yep.
The supplement thing it's really frustrating, because I feel like people, there's a line. Like, I think pharmaceutical drugs, like, obviously have their place, and people want to avoid those. And then they go into the holistic space. But then taking a bunch of supplements and not changing your diet or your lifestyle is kind of the same thing. It's just like with a mask.
Yep.
And I'm like, I have a very minimal approach when it comes to supplements. Like, I put my clients on 1 to 2, and that's it. Because it's tricky when they go, like, I have a lot of clients that have been to like naturopaths or functional medicine doctors, and they get all this really extensive testing, which is great. But then they're like, I'm taking 20 different supplements. I'm like, what the heck? Like, it can be useful for a little bit if your body's like not absorbing anything and you need that extra support, but that's not a long-term solution. And I think it's kind of just like taking a drug, but just with a different face. It's
a holistic Band-Aid. I used to say, actually, one of your dad would probably, well, maybe not. Your dad may know Charlie Majors. He passed recently, but he was a big name in chiropractic. And he used to say that medications were a permission slip to keep living the same toxic lifestyle that made you sick to begin with. And it's pretty much true, whether it's a holistic Band-Aid or a medicine. But like, where a lot of people also fall off too is that medicine works fast, because it forces your body to do what the medication is designed to do. That's what the side effects are for. It forces your body against its will to produce the outcome. Holistic herbs take a little bit of time. And if you're doing it the wrong way, if you're taking too much or too little, a month goes by, 2 months go by, 3 months go by, no results. You're like, well, why the hell? I'm just going to go take a medication. It'll fix the problem much quicker. So it's the right analysis and figuring out, yeah, there are some protocols where I do have a lot of people taking a lot of stuff just as like resuscitation, just bring them back to life. Yeah. And then the goal is to get them off, because supplements to me, or herbs or whatever you want to call them, they're designed to supplement your current state of health and your current lifestyle. And as long as you've been coached on how to eat properly, then you shouldn't need these supplements in the future, unless you love them. Like one of my favorite herbs is astragalus. It's an awesome herb. I love it. So it's my own personal bias on it. Hormonally, what are some of the big things that you see hormonally with some of your patients and clients that you work with?
The biggest one I've seen lately is PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. And it's actually startling how many women have it. And it's wild that it's like, I don't know if you've heard it referred to as this, but it's like the diabetes of the ovaries. Mm-hmm. And most of the time it can be reversed by proper diet. But when people go to the doctor or their gyno mm-hmm. and they say, oh, you have PCOS, they're either given birth control or metformin.
Yeah.
And I think it's so insane, because that's literally just masking the problem even more. And then they tell them, oh, when you want to have children, just get off this medication and then you can do IVF. And that is the most frustrating thing in the world, because most of the time, like 90% of the time, it can be reversed through balancing your blood sugar and building muscle and doing these things that help your body become more insulin sensitive. But the doctors don't tell them that. And and it will take more time, and you might suffer with the symptoms for a little bit longer, but in the long term, it's going to be so worth it. And that's one of the main things that I've seen lately is PCOS.
Yeah. One of my patients that was diagnosed with PCOS, I think she was diagnosed when she was like 14 or 15. And mm-hmm. she was put on like every medication known to man. She had issues with like depression, anxiety. So she was put on some SSRIs, was just pounded for like her whole life. And then my buddy in Vegas sent her to me. He was like, this lady is just a mess. Like, can you help her? I'm like, game on, let's try. Like, I love it, challenges. So she comes in, we run a hormone analysis on her, and I'm like going through it. I knew her health history, and I'm like moving everything around. And I think she's 43 now. I think I got her when she was like 41. She was told her whole life she would never be able to have kids because she had PCOS. And I'm like, well, okay. All you had to do was this. And she broke down on the phone crying. And I'm like, what are you crying for? And she's like, you're telling me that I could have had a kid. Like, I thought my entire life I couldn't have a kid. Now I'm 40-some years old and now I can't have kids. I don't even have a partner. Like, there's nothing for me to do. And I'm like, fuck.
Oh,
so
sad.
Yeah, it's super sad. And I'm proud of like people like you and us that are starting to learn this stuff. And there's more of us. There's like an uprising of holistic coaches and people who are starting to learn the truth about real health. And if we can get people, and I always said, like, I joke with my wife, I'm like, I want to overhaul the healthcare system and I want to get into the schools. We've got a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I am looking to hijack the shit out of their schools and like just teach them like the proper education. I think every single young woman who gets her cycle, give her 3 months and then run a hormone panel on her, run a stool test on her, figure out where she's at, so that way she doesn't feel as though she has to get shoved on birth control or antidepressants or whatever else it might be. And it's sad to see like the state of health in America nowadays. And if we can get them young and teach them how to be healthy young, then this is like generational health that just gets passed down time and time again. And that's what I'm really in this for, is the generational stuff, because it's how we change the world, in my opinion.
Agreed. And it's so needed. And I mean, our healthcare system is so backwards and broken, and it's nobody's fault. It's just like the doctors and the gynecologists, like that's what they learned in school. So how else are they supposed to act? Like, obviously they want the best for their patients and they do that in the best way they know how. But yeah, if health was taught in school in that way, that would be a game changer. Like, there'd be so many women learning how to track their own cycle and not being on these medications that cause so much harm in the long run. And we probably would see so many less people with these hormone imbalances. Yeah.
Yeah. It's sad to see. And I know, I'm not sure how old you are, but when I was back in high school, like antidepressants and birth controls, they were like first starting to come out. And I'm like, well, I don't know what the heck these are. And like these girls were like, oh, I'm on birth control. I'm like, okay, like whatever. And then there was one girl in particular, I still remember it. She was this isn't like being superficial, but she was like in really good shape. And then over the summer, she came back and she was like a balloon. Like she was like puffy, not like just fat, like something was wrong. And I'm like, what happened? And I was friends with her and she's like, well, I got put on birth control. And from that moment on, I'm like, what the hell is that thing doing to your body to make you gain that much weight that quickly? Like her diet didn't change, her exercise level didn't change. It just ruined everything. And so I've always been curious, even since back in high school, like what is it that it does? And then when you actually learn about it and then the vitamin deficiencies that it causes and the harm that it causes to the GI tract and everything else, it's like, holy crap. And we're medicating from a young age, first cycle, boom, there's your birth control. Welcome to womanhood. So
Yeah.
You guys have it hard. Women have it hard.
Luckily, I grew up in a holistic family. So my parents were like, I don't really think you need that. Like, not really the best idea. But if I had been a teenager that struggled with like cystic acne or depression or like really painful periods, I might have gone that route. Yeah. And there's no easy solution for that. Like birth control would be the easier solution to just kind of everything out. Yeah. But then you deal with the effects years later when you get off it, and then everything kind of rebounds. And then you're like, great, now I have to deal with this while I'm trying to have a kid. And
yeah. Set you up for success later on in life, basically. Awesome. Well, so with PCOS, because I want to be secretive but curious at the same time for people who are listening. So we know, the diabetes of the ovaries. What do you see typical patterns? Do you see typical markers? If somebody's like, well, what do I get tested? Like, what would you suggest for people to take a look at when it's coming to like a PCOS presentation?
Usually the high testosterone. If you have high testosterone, low estrogen, sometimes honestly, the estrogen isn't even low. It's just the testosterone that's extra high, just high androgens. That's typically PCOS. But then of course you want to go and actually get your ovaries tested to see if you have cysts on them. And then the other thing with PCOS is it's a syndrome. So it's not really like there's a test that says like you have PCOS or you don't have PCOS. It's kind of just a set of symptoms that you have to fall under. And there's a lot of different ones. Like if you're getting facial hair, if you're losing the hair on your head, if you have hormonal acne on your jawline, if you're gaining weight, if your periods are irregular, like all these sorts of things would kind of be an indication that you have PCOS. It's not necessarily like one test that you have to take to see if you have it. Because if you don't have any of those symptoms, but you have cysts on your ovaries, it's technically polycystic ovarian syndrome,
It's literally the definition of it. Yeah. Multiple cysts on the ovaries. You fit the mold. Yeah. I've had patients with like little tumors on the ovaries, little cysts, little tumors inside the body that are androgen producers, like, and they didn't show up on any of the urine analysis, blood analysis, or anything. They just went in for an ultrasound and they're like, oh, what's this? And then they looked at the little tumor that was on it. It was like, oh crap, this is what is creating it. So they removed it, and then all of the androgenic symptoms disappeared because the producer was gone. So there's so many things. You're right. Like, it's not a one size fits all when it comes to that. And when I asked you that, I had a feeling you were going to answer it that way too, because I don't want people to think it's a one size fits all. Like, one of the things, it works super well, and you may use this, but inositol is one of those things that a lot of people with PCOS research, and they find out, hey, if I take this, it helps with my sleep, it helps with insulin sensitivity, so it helps to rebalance the sensitivity to insulin. And it's just, honestly, it's just a great product just in general to kind of have in your arsenal. But that's one of the most common things that people will take for PCOS. But the way that I approach things, and you more than likely do as well, is we want to find that root cause. And the cascade of things that happen from my experiences, there's going to be some insult, a stressor. So something's going to cause inflammation. Okay. If that goes unchecked for a while, it's going to lead into a catabolic state. So things start breaking down. Okay. That goes on. We develop that insulin resistance. Okay. So problems with blood sugar, we start craving things. We can have candida that makes us crave sugar, which drowns us in glucose. And then it leads to that oxidative stress or damage. And so when we run tests or we analyze your lifestyle, it's like we're saying, okay, you may be in an insulin resistant piece right now, but there's 2 stages before that. What's over here? What's here that's causing this as an end result? Right. So I love it. It's refreshing talking to people that know what they're doing. So
I know there's people that don't.
Yeah. And that's what we were saying kind of before we hit the record button. It's like, there's so many people spewing information and don't do this and then do this. And then like 3 months later, like, don't do what I told you to do 3 months ago, do this now. And, you know, anybody who's on a health journey, it's hard to find people that you trust. But I always tell people, you know, try to be your own health advocate, right? And then find people that you trust to help to guide you and coach you on that. Just use logic. If you're doing something that intuitively you're like, this doesn't seem right, then at least ask a question, because your body may be telling you something that even like as a doc, we can't necessarily pick up. But if you take something, your body responds a little wonky. It's like, well, maybe that one's not right for you. Let's swap it out and try this one and replace.
Yeah. I think that's even over the past couple of years doing this, one of the main things that I've seen that I think is causing an issue, and like everything comes from your nervous system, right? But when people are on like this health journey, they bounce around so many different like diets, so many different ideas. And I completely understand the desire to like attach yourself to something and be like, oh gosh, this is the one thing that's going to like finally heal me and be the answer to everything.
Yeah.
And they do it like 100%. And then it doesn't work. So they get really discouraged and then they give up and they go on to the next thing. And it's usually the opposite. Like it's that pendulum swing. So it's like, oh, I was vegan. Oh, now I'm going to be carnivore. Now I'm going to be paleo. Now I'm going to intermittent fast. And like all of these things are causing so much stress and dysfunction in your nervous system. And it wrecks your metabolism. It wrecks your thyroid. It wrecks your adrenals. And most of the time, like once you stop the yo-yoing and you just start eating like a regular person and give your body a little bit of consistency, you feel so much better.
Yeah. I need you to preach on that. I took a step back. I'm like, okay, just go with that. Because that stress is huge. Yeah. And again, women being more impressionable to stress than men. We're too thick-headed half the time. We're pretty dumb 99.9% of the time. And we get past stress really quickly. But for women, your main sex hormones are progesterone and estrogen. They're more compassionate hormones than what we have. So when you come across a stress, right, and you see somebody that may be fad dieting or crash dieting and doing these polar opposites, talk about the stress that causes on the body. Talk about the nervous system. Let me hear you go at it. I'm going to let you preach here for a little bit and see what you got.
I mean, it's funny because I feel like in my health journey, my nervous system was the last thing I looked at, because when you come into the holistic space, I don't know about you, but like I'm very like science minded. I can be very like practical and logical. And so a lot of the times, like the more spiritual woo-woo stuff is off-putting to me. And so when I was dealing with a lot of my gut issues, I was like, you know, trying to piece everything together in a very like logical, scientific way. And my boyfriend at the time, I remember he looked at me and he was like, you are just stressing yourself out so much. Like, what are you doing? Like, why don't you just go sit down and meditate every morning and like see if that helps? And I was like, shut up. Like, that's not And I'm someone who, like, when I'm stressed, I realize it doesn't really show up for me emotionally. Like, I don't have an emotional reaction, but it gets stored in my body as like pain or stomach issues, or my hormones get a little bit out of whack. And I never made that connection between my emotional state and the physical symptoms I was having. And I was too hard-headed to see that there was a connection there. But once I put that piece together and I started meditating and I started to calm down, and like when I was eating, I would sit down and like chew my food and not be thinking about like, oh my God, this is going to hurt my stomach, you know, like stressing so much about that. I felt my body switch from sympathetic to parasympathetic, which is rest and digest. So then I started digesting my food better, started sleeping better, and everything. Like, I felt like that was the last piece of the puzzle that really like actually pushed me over the edge and like helped me heal. And I think it's just one of those things that you have to experience before you fully believe it, if you're like me and you're a little bit more logical. But they say like stress is the root of all disease. And I remember when I first started this, I was thinking like, yeah, but like I'm not stressed. But like most people are stressed. And if you're a woman and you harbor, or a man, but like if you harbor your emotions and you don't speak your thoughts and you're just like holding on to a lot of stuff, that's going to show up in your physical body, because it is science. It's actually not like a whole spiritual thing. It's physically your nervous system controls everything, like your vagus nerve. That's the gut brain connection. And so you have to be able to make sure that's firing correctly. Because if you're stuck in a sympathetic state, you're not going to heal. You're going to get stuck.
Yeah. That's awesome. But also in a funny way, or I guess ironic way, you're talking about the last thing you approach was the nervous system, and your dad's a chiropractor. So, so I had to laugh for a second on that, like, whoops. But yeah, but that's such a good point. And I work with a lot of patients, a lot of diverse patients, and some of my patients are in the Amish community. And if you're like devout, like super strict Amish women, their place is to basically just shut up and don't say anything. Like, it's just their power is completely removed from them. And I always laugh when I see these memes floating around on Instagram, and it's like, oh, the Amish are so healthy. I'm like, well, you don't know the damn Amish then, because they are not healthy. They may do things differently than us, but women, the number one organ gland, whatever that is affected, is the thyroid. And they're like, oh, well, I don't know what's going on. My thyroid's all messed up, and I'm on medication. They're on the roller coaster for medication. I'm like, well, talk to me about your stress. And they're like, what does that have to do with my thyroid? I'm like, everything. Yeah. And then you start peeling back these layers, and you're like, holy shit. Like, you haven't been able to speak your mind, your voice, or anything. And half the time these patients turn into therapy sessions that I'm working with, and I'm fine with that. But it's like, yeah, I feel so bad. But you'll see that. And I used to, because my wife is more in like the woo-woo stuff, and I was there, and then I kind of I'm like so back and forth with it, but it is so powerful, and it has its place. But like when you think about it, you have like the different chakras of the body. And again, you're in Tulum, which is also funny because you're not woo-woo, but Tulum is a huge energy center. But the throat chakra is, it's the voice, it's the speaking. And so when you don't use it, it tends to be more constricted. So you'll have more sore throats, more coughs, you'll have clearing of the throat, you'll have more thyroid complaints. And then this portion is like, it's appropriate, but so the thyroid's also connected to like the vaginal canal as well. So the thyroid, if you look like an aerial view of your throat, or your thyroid's at, it'll look the same as the vaginal canal, and both will constrict at the same time. So it's like you can't use your throat. And so then you go and you submit, and sex is not enjoyable, and you're like, it's always painful, and I don't get anything from it. It was because you're not allowed to use your voice. And so by him not allowing you to use your voice, it's causing you stress, causing you weight gain, causing you thyroid dysfunction, and causing him to have a bad time there. So maybe take this energy and go have a conversation with your husband about it. So it's such a big role in this. And I'm curious, depending on where you've dove into the woo-woo side of things, when I work with Candida, which is quite often, it's probably one of the most common things that we see. There was somebody who once told me that Candida has to do with the spiritual aspect of just worthiness or lack thereof. Have you seen a correlation with like some of the patients that you work with, and they have low self-worth, a lot of like lack of worthiness, and then recurring Candida?
I guess in a way, yeah. It's funny because I would say maybe like 90% of my clients have such similar personalities. And it's usually very type A women who are extremely hard workers.
Sure.
Like anything I tell them, which is great. They're very much so perfectionists. And I guess that kind of can correlate to low self-worth if you're kind of compensating for like your work and your being perfect.
Sure.
That kind of self-worth. So maybe.
Yeah. Something to think about. You'll see. I didn't believe it for the longest time. And then I would just ask the questions like, how do you feel about your self-worth? And patients would be like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I don't know. Just curious. I just wanted to see if this sticks. And it was like, it was 100 for like a month straight. It was like 100% anybody I asked. I'm like, holy cow. Like, okay. And I can see from like the spiritual standpoint, sure, but then also from like the nervous system standpoint, when you're more stressed out, you typically have more blood sugar dysregulation, so you can't balance it. So you're gonna have your blood sugar spikes, which is then going to make you go and grab more, processed sugar, those types of things, and you're going to consume those, and then therefore you're going to feed more of the candida species, or like you were talking about, the opportunistic species there within the gut. So I was just curious what your thought was on that. I'm going to trap you on this one too. So what are your thoughts on parasite cleanses?
I don't like them.
Okay.
I mean, I've never done one, so I can't speak from experience, but I think we all have parasites, and the whole and this is maybe my bias, but I see the parasite cleanses with the full moon spiritual type of person.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not judging, but I think most of the time parasite cleanses are so unnecessary. They really just make you go to the bathroom for days on end. Of course, you're going to feel better after that. You're going to feel lighter. You're going to feel like
I lost weight. Yeah.
You got everything out because you did. But most of the time, what you see in the toilet that you think is a parasite is actually just like your mucosal lining shedding, because you're taking so many binders and so many things that are literally ripping apart your gut lining. And it's usually not a parasite. And maybe it is. Like sometimes, I mean, I've seen a lot of people actually see parasites, and that's great that you got that out. But I think most of the time they're just completely unnecessary.
I 100% agree. That's why I immediately smiled. I'm like, yes. Otherwise it would have gotten really awkward. But yeah, like the parasite cleanse things. And if you if you work with parasites, most parasites life cycle is actually 60 days. So from like cyst to troph, so baby to full grown adult, 60 days. So people are doing 3-day flushes. I'm like, you're not getting everything. And they're like, well, I'm going to do one every month. I'm like, you're making somebody a lot of money doing one every month. And then I get yelled at because I get really fired up about this. I'm like, your body, like you said, we have parasites within us, but we also have a massive defense mechanism, which is the stomach. And so if people get so many parasites, like what the heck is going on with your stomach? That stomach acid can strip paint off a car. How is it not getting rid of those parasites?
Yeah.
And so if you treat, you're treating down or upstream versus going back downstream. Like what allowed this thing to come in to begin with? So that's where I get all fired up, is it's not enough time if you're actually going to remove a parasite. And the other thing is like your stomach is the issue. Like look at the stomach, figure out what's going on. What is the stress response? Are you stuck in a sympathetic state, which is depleting your stomach acid? Are you not mentally and physically present while you're eating, which is then going to drop your stomach acid? Are you taking antacids or other medications? So it's like, there's so many things that go on behind the scenes. Then like we show up to the table, we're like, oh yeah, we need to work on the stomach. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, no, trust me. Like we'll work on that and then you'll be fine. But I was curious your take on that.
Yeah. It's not a root cause thing. Again, it's like, there's so many different root causes, but it's really just, if you get resilience in your body, you're not going to have to deal with so many of these things all the freaking time. And it's usually the same people that I see that get like UTIs, and then they take a antibiotic, and then they have stomach issues, and then they get strep throat, and they take another antibiotic, and they get another UTI, and then they get a yeast infection. And then it's just like this cycle of madness. And it's like, well, your immune system is lowered for some reason. So like, instead of taking 20 antibiotics a month and just making the problem even worse because now you have no good bacteria, let's actually fix the problem so you don't have these chronic issues that you're dealing with over and over and over again. It's nuts.
Yeah. It's like, get off the hamster wheel already. And it's because a lot of it is emotionally routed and mentally, from like a spiritual standpoint, like our bodies always want to be right. So like when you say like these people are jumping on diets 100%, they want to be right. They want to be like, this is the diet or this is the protocol so they can be right. And if you're like, but it's not, then you're like, well, are you trying to tell me that I'm not right? And you're like, well, yeah, of course. They're like, oh no. And so they feel like they have to admit, and they have to process through a little bit of guilt of like, I went full tilt on this. I yelled at people and told them that they had to do it this way. And then now I'm like, oh wait, now it's not that way. So it's like a dying of this like inner egoic sense so that they can move on with their health and be better and healthier. But yeah, there's a lot that goes into this.
So much.
Yeah. You brought up the gut-brain connection there as well. So we talked on the gut-brain connection, talked delightfully on parasites, because I'm glad we aligned on that. We talked about hormones, gut health. Is there anything else you want to sprinkle in there? Things that you see clinically that you think people need to be made more aware of, or anything of that nature?
Not off the top of my head. I think like one of the main things that I've been seeing recently that the PCOS thing kind of ties into is people that are coming from the fitness industry that have that were doing the macro tracking and the calorie counting, and they've been on like the energy drinks and the protein bars and the protein shakes. And there's a lot of good products out there, but the ones that have the really shitty ingredients with artificial sweeteners and all that stuff. And they're doing all of this thinking that it's like healthy, but fitness and health are two completely separate things. And then they have the bloating, they have the PCOS or the hypothyroidism, or they just don't get their periods at all. And then you kind of have to unravel this whole paradigm of like, I had so much control in my diet and my lifestyle, and I was feeling really good. Now I feel like shit and I don't know where to go from here. And then you have to do all of this like backpedaling and unraveling of the whole paradigm that is what health is. And I think the first step to that is like learning about ingredients and like reading labels and bringing back your intuition and like your hunger cues and all that sort of stuff after being in that industry for a while.
Yeah, I know that industry all too well. I've done, I actually have a couple of trophies up there. I've done two bodybuilding shows and a men's physique show. And physically, I look great. Health-wise, the sickest I have ever been in my life. Like I gave myself irritable bowel. Like I think it was the Phil Heath Classic I went to go do. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm going to make it in the building because my bowels are just like so inflamed right now. Still looked fine on stage. Still did really well. Came home and I'm like, oh, this is horrible. And then I had another one of my buddies, Seth Feroci from back in Pittsburgh. He quit bodybuilding. He got his pro card, did his first pro show, and he ended up in a hospital because he took too many diuretics and ended up getting rushed off to the hospital for it. So like, it's not a healthy industry. And the day and age of social media and the photo editing and the video editing, and then just do this, like it drives me crazy. And it's such a sick cycle because like when you have kids and stuff, like you'll see these moms that will bounce back like that, and then it'll make like a whole wave of people jealous. And I'm always like, hold on, you don't know. There can be you bounce back super fast and you're genetically gifted, but you don't know what they're doing behind the scenes. If they were just like, I'm not breastfeeding this kid and I'm just gonna go on some hormonal protocols and take some bioidenticals, take some tests, some Anavar, do whatever I can, cleanse, Winstraw to cut everything off so they can look great. Cool, you look great, but you're incredibly unhealthy. So there's a lot to go into that. But you brought up something that I want to go into as well. What are your thoughts and take on like the sucralose, the aspartame, ACE-K, those types of things, the artificial sweeteners?
I think they're one of the worst things that you can consume. First of all, they completely wreck your gut. And I made a post about this a couple weeks ago when I got here. I bought this granola from the store and I didn't read the ingredients foolishly. And I was reading the front of it and it was like, this contains sweeteners not suitable for children. And I was like, that's weird. So I flip it over and it has sucralose and maltodextrin. And I was like, and then I read at the bottom and it was like, if you consume too much of this, it can have a laxative effect. And that's why it's not suitable for children. And I was like, they don't have this on the packages in the States. They're just pumping everything with sucralose and there's Splenda everywhere. And people are still arguing that it's completely fine. They're also doing research now that first of all, like it's so artificial. So obviously it's going to do something weird to our bodies.
Yeah.
Our taste sends a signal to our brain. So now they're doing research that I'm sure you're aware of that, like that can actually spike our blood sugar and our insulin.
Cause weight gain.
And the sweetness and cause weight gain. So I think they're absolutely horrible.
That's one of the biggest, especially like in that industry and stuff. And I fell a victim to it because my coach was like, you want to be sugar free. And so I use like Walden Farms, like I don't even like syrups and stuff on like oatmeal and there's no sugar. I'm like, oh God, it's disgusting. But again, I had irritable bowel. I'm like, what the hell? Like I'm eating really clean, but I'm having this stuff in there. But like you will have like these natural pre-workouts they're like, there's no artificial colors, no artificial this, no artificial anything. And then you turn it around, there's sucralose, ACE-K, which damages your brain cells. I'm like, what are you doing? And then I'll get in huge battles with people, whether it's on social media and they're like, show me the proof. I'm like, I can, but also just do it yourself. Like, do it and see how you feel. When you take your pre-workout and you have to take a poop on the way to the gym, it's because one, there's probably too much caffeine for you, but two, you just ingested something that's chlorinated for your bowels and just bleached your bowels through. Like, it doesn't make any sense. But I've seen studies too where it causes neuron degeneration, so like nervous system degeneration. So sucralose can actually mimic MS. So people are like, I have MS. And then you pull them off of sucralose and their symptoms go away. And they're like, what the hell happened? It's like, well, you took away a threat, sucralose. Yeah. So yeah, it drives me insane.
One of the most frustrating things on the internet is there's this one doctor on TikTok. I don't remember his name, but his whole page is just debunking like people like you and me that make posts about like artificial sweeteners and like seed oil stuff. And he's like, this research study, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, use your brain. Like, how about use logic? Because studies can be funded by so many different organizations and research can be interpreted in so many different ways. And like, it's just so frustrating. It drives me absolutely nuts.
Yeah. I went for like a month. I was getting sucked into those. I think Instagram was just like the algorithm was triggering me with that stuff. And I'd go and like, just be like pissed off. I'm like, like, what are you talking? Are you serious? And like, I have all the research to pat. I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to engage. If I engage, then I'm going to be another subject. And I don't really care because I can defend myself, but like, it's crazy, the debunking. And then there are some of the radical people that are out there on the holistic side that are like, don't eat air, like air is going to kill you. It's like, well, it's not the cleanest air. You can filter it, sure, but like, work with your body. Your body's designed to filter some of this stuff out. So like, be smart. But yeah, there's influencers. There's so many accounts now. I think there's like 3 in particular that I get marketed to, I guess, and that fires me up. That aside, well, I guess let's stay in that vein for a second. Do you have anything else that you see online that just triggers the shit out of you that makes you like super frustrated?
Yes.
What? Get into it. Do it.
I'm sure you've seen this too, but like the dietitians that encourage eating of like cereal and Pop-Tarts and ice cream and all that sort of stuff. They're like the all foods fit people, which fair. All foods can fit in your diet. Yes. If you're a healthy person and you don't have high inflammation, you don't have blood sugar dysregulation, you don't have hormonal imbalances, you don't have gut issues, but the people that are consuming that type of content on those pages are sick. So like, what is telling them to eat pizza if that's what their body wants? Like that drives me absolutely bonkers because that is just the worst. You're a dietitian and you're telling people to eat junk food that's extremely processed. The whole eating disorder thing is a whole different topic. Like, that's not what I do. And that's not what a lot of people do, but you can't cater everything to people who've had eating disorders.
I work with some people with eating disorders, like former competitors and stuff, and and even moms and stuff too. They'll get triggered into a state where it's like, they don't like to be told they can't have certain things, and we'll always figure that out and figure out where the root cause is and where the stem is from it. Because when you have an eating disorder, it's the same thing like the food sensitivity. It's a cause and a symptom at the same time. Why is it? Like self-worth. What is it about your self-worth that made you feel like that? Like, I'm well aware that I've got like a state of body dysmorphia. If I go below 200 pounds, my mind messes with me. Like but I know exactly where it comes from. Like I used to get bullied when I was a kid, and I went over 200 pounds and I was able to defend myself. And so there's like that psychological kick. I get it. Yeah. I understand it. I'm like, well, I just have to eat a little bit more. I'm fine. But like, we can't cater to the people who claim to have eating disorders when in reality it's just gluttony, and they're consumed by the critters in their gut that is telling them, or that are telling them, to continue to eat sugar. Candida is the biggest culprit of that. It makes you crave sugar. When you try to kill Candida, if you're doing it right, Candida will yell at you. It'll paralyze your bowels to keep them in there. It'll make you crave and rationalize just one little bit of a Reese's peanut butter cup would be good. And then you go on a bender again, right? Like, you're eating to be healthy. You're not eating to necessarily look a certain way. A side effect of being healthy is you're going to be leaner. You're not going to have any fat on you, or not as much fat on you, because Fat cells swell when there's toxic accumulation. You get the toxins out, those cells shrink. It's common sense. So a lot of it comes from like you feel safe with who you're working with, and then you approach it gently, but also sternly, where it's like, I'm not going to let you use that as an excuse for you not to be healthy. You're paying me to get you healthy. We have to switch the psychology behind this and start feeding your body as if you want to be an optimal human being. And a lot of times it works. But the if it fits your macro thing, like that's kind of like that same vein. That was big when I was in competing, and I used to date girls who were like bikini competitors. They're like, I'm eating donuts for breakfast. I'm like, you fucking idiot. What? Like, if it fits your macros. I'm like, what? And she was type 2 diabetic. I'm like, all right, that fits the mold. Good job. Enjoy your insulin or whatever. Like, so that's been a craze that's been going on. But that's another thing, like in my opinion, like a medication is like a permission slip to keep living. Well, if I tell you what your macros are, and I need you to fit in it as like a Weight Watchers thing, if you eat that, you get X amount of points for whatever, then it rewards your bad behavior and you feel like you're doing something good, when in reality it's just justifying your toxic behavior that's made you sick to begin with. So yeah, that is a toxic trend. I
agree. It's yeah. And then it's also like the food that you're eating is messing with your dopamine cycle and it's causing you to be more addicted to it. So it's like, the more you eat it, even if it's in small amounts, the more you're feeding that addiction and the more you're looking for food for dopamine. Yeah. And so it's actually just making it harder on yourself, and you're not breaking the cycle, and your taste buds are going to be so much more like, they're just going to keep desiring that sugar and that fat and like that whole bliss point of food. And you're never going to get away from that. So it's just like, I don't think it's helpful for anyone.
And it turns, when you were speaking there too, it's something that came to mind where it's kind of like a Pavlovian experience, like where Dr. Pavlov was doing the dogs and salivating and stuff. And like, I noticed it like with our kids, and I'm one of those weird people, like they don't watch TV that often. They don't really have tablet time unless they're like on an airplane and it's like a 6-hour flight and I don't want to kill myself. Like that, I'll give them something. But what will happen is, it's like a learned experience, and you share food with that learned experience. So if I put something on the TV for the kids and they sit down on a couch and they go for it, within 3 to 5 minutes of my kids sitting on a couch, they turn to me and ask for food. I'm like, no, bro, like you're not hungry. Like you're just bored. And like, we did it a couple times, like in the beginning, like when he would sit down, we'd give him a bowl of nuts or something and he would eat them. So now it's a trained experience. So every time I sit here, I think that I need to have food. It's like Pavlov. So like these people who are overindulgers or Netflixing and chilling and just ordering Uber Eats all the time, the brain will wire itself and say, oh, you're Netflixing, let's Uber Eats too. So you grab your phone, you get on there and you start ordering crappy food to be delivered for you because you're too lazy to do it yourself. Like, and it becomes this whole experience, becomes this whole identity as to who you are. And it's hard to change that when you're chemically wired in the brain to do so. And that's where like Joe Dispenza's work. I don't know if you know too much about Joe, but like that dude blows my mind. Like I have a lot of his courses. We watch them. I've meditated, and his meditations are wicked powerful. But yeah, like that's toxic.
Yeah. Like it just, you keep rewiring, and then it's just most of the time, like with eating, not eating disorders, but like habits around eating. Like I have a lot of women who are like, oh, I just can't stop eating at night. And it's like, it's because of that thing that you're just talking about. It's habitual. Mm-hmm. You just have to break the habit, and habits are very hard to break, right? Like I get that, but once you realize it's a habit and it's not like this crazy mountain that you have to climb to get over, it makes it a lot easier. Like instead of sitting on the couch, go for a walk. That just breaks the cycle. Like you just have to get out of your body and out of your head.
Yeah. I've had people, like, especially this time of year. I remember this time last year, I helped a mom. She's really good at like baking, and she had cookies out for like each one of the holidays, Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas. And she was like, I'm doing really good. She was doing anti-candida. She dropped like 20 pounds, like as a side effect. She was doing fantastic. This time of year came and she's like, oh my gosh, like I can't stop eating cookies. I'm like, why? She's like, well, I keep making them. I'm like, well, can you stop making them? And you're like, well, no, the rest of the family wants them. I'm like, okay. And I'm like, well, describe to me your surroundings. Like, where are these cookies at? She's like, right on the counter. I'm like, what? No, it's too easy. It's too accessible. I'm like, put them in a cookie jar or put them in the fridge. And she's like, well, I think I can put them in the fridge. I'm like, cool. Put stuff in front of it. So when you're going to grab it, number one, you have to get up and move. Basically create all these obstacles before you're able to obtain your final product. Because in those checks, you're like, do I really want this? Do I really want to eat this? And I've had people Post-it note too. If they go into the pantry, put a big old Post-it note. Do I really want food right now or am I bored? And they're like, oh crap. And then they have like that internal judgment, like, yeah, I guess I am bored. I could do something different. And it helps to break that habit a little bit quicker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's really tough. Because I feel like there's that moment before, like I've talked to a lot of binge eaters, and then there's like a moment before they do it where they feel like they're going to tip over the edge of being out of control and like giving into that thing, where their brain is like, yes, I'm going to do this, or like, no, like I shouldn't do this. And there's that moment of like the pause between like engaging in the behavior or not. Mm-hmm. That like split second or however long it is, like that is what dictates if you're going to keep the cycle going or stop. And it's like a muscle. Like once you stop once, you get the strength to stop the next. But if you don't like, I don't know if it's like willpower is the right word, but like if you don't push through that one time, you're just going to be stuck in that cycle.
This, I think, is a lot of the conscious awareness too. Like so many of the things that we do is just subconscious. That time of day, boom, we get tired, boom, we Netflix, boom, we get food, and it becomes routine. We don't even have to think about it. Our body just says, okay, this is what we do. Okay, cool. So when you pull it out of the subconscious and put it in front of you, like consciously, I'm like, what? I don't like that. I don't like how I wake up in the morning. I eat too much before bed and then my stomach is full. I sleep horribly. My heart rate variability is off. My stomach hurts in the morning. I have a headache, and you start the day crappy. And like, why do I keep doing that? And so if you can get ahead of it, again, pull it to the conscious and be like, well, I'm going to do something differently and schedule that, or put an alarm on your phone and be like, hey, at 9 o'clock when you get hungry or whatever, go read a book or go do something else that can be equally enjoyable, or go to your room, go to bed, get away from the kitchen, get away from the pantry, shut the door, and don't be tempted by whatever it is that may be out there. So yeah, there's a lot to it. I feel like we could keep going on forever, but I'm going to be respectful of your time. And I'm going to ask you one last question before I say like where people can find you. If somebody were to say, hey, I want to do some testing as like a yearly physical, what test would you recommend people to do for a yearly physical?
I would do a stool test, and then a full hormone and thyroid panel.
Okay. There you go. Simple enough. And where can people find you?
I'm on Instagram as _Graceful Wellness. TikTok is graceful.wellness, I think. And then my website is gracefulwellness.net.
Common theme the whole way through.
Yes.
Perfect. What things are you offering for people? I know you have group coaching, one-on-one as well. Tell a little bit more about that, please.
So I have a group program. It's called the New Leaf. And it's basically to kick you out of that habit loop that we were just talking about. And it's really short. It's only a 2-week program, but I do that because I think when people dedicate themselves to 2 weeks of doing the things that they need to do, they realize how much better they feel. And that's what actually helps people change. It's like realizing that you feeling better is not that far away. And these are the basic things that you have to do. But once you dedicate yourself to actually doing those for even 2 weeks, it changes your whole life. And that's a group program. And then I have my one-on-one coaching, and I have an online course called the Gut Health Guide, which basically takes you through like IBS, SIBO, Candida protocols that you can do on your own time.
There you go. Built for you protocols. Nice and easy. Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us. I know I talked way more than I anticipated, but the conversation kept flowing, topics kept coming up. So I appreciate you fielding all the crazy questions we had going on there. It was a good time.
Yeah, it was fun.